Some words have the power to heal decades of wounds in just minutes. When Samuel Carter stepped up to the podium at his daughter's funeral, nobody expected the reclusive millionaire to speak at all. What he said next would not only bring a room full of strangers to tears but would also uncover family secrets that had been buried for 25 years, forever changing the lives of everyone who heard them. The morning fog clung to Hillcrest Cemetery like a gray shroud, matching the somber mood of the 100 or so people gathered around the mahogany casket. Elena Carter had been only 32 when the car accident took her life, leaving behind a husband, 2 young children, and a father who had barely spoken to her in 5 years. Samuel Carter stood apart from the crowd, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, his silver hair catching what little sunlight managed to pierce through the overcast sky. At 68, he had built an empire in real estate, but today he looked like any other grieving father, broken, lost, and carrying the weight of words left unsaid. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew about the falling out between Samuel and Elena. It had been the talk of their small town of Millbrook for years. Some said it was about money. Others whispered it was about Elena's choice to marry David Martinez, a humble teacher instead of the wealthy businessman Samuel had chosen for her. But the truth was something far more complex, something that had eaten away at both father and daughter until pride became an insurmountable wall between them. Elena's husband, David, stood with their 2 children, 8-year-old Marcus and 6-year-old Isabella. His eyes were red from crying, but there was also anger there. Anger at the man who had abandoned his daughter when she needed him most. The children barely knew their grandfather. Samuel had become a stranger to his own family, a ghost of regret haunting the edges of their lives. The pastor began the service with traditional prayers and readings, but everyone's attention kept drifting to Samuel. Would he speak? Would he even stay for the entire service? The last time most people had seen him was at Elena's wedding 5 years ago, where he had sat in the back row and left before the reception. Elena's best friend, Maria Santos, delivered the first eulogy. She spoke of Elena's laugh, her dedication to her work as a nurse, and her unwavering love for her children. But even as she shared beautiful memories, there was an undercurrent of sadness that went beyond grief. Maria had been the one trying to reconcile father and daughter for years, the one who had witnessed Elena's tears every Father's Day, every birthday that passed without a word from Samuel. Elena never stopped hoping, Maria said, her voice breaking. She kept your letters, Mr. Carter. All of them. Even though you never sent them, she somehow knew you were writing them. She found the drafts in your old desk when she cleaned out the house after your wife passed. She carried one of them in her purse every day. Samuel's composure cracked for just a moment. His shoulders tensed, and those who were watching closely saw his hands tremble. The letter Maria mentioned was one of dozens he had written but never had the courage to send. Letters asking for forgiveness, letters trying to explain his actions, letters pouring out a father's love that pride had kept locked away. When Maria finished speaking, an uncomfortable silence settled over the gathering. The pastor looked toward Samuel expectantly, as did many in the crowd. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, dreading, or hoping for, depending on their relationship with the Carter family. Samuel remained motionless for what felt like an eternity. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree that stood sentinel over this section of the cemetery. It was the same tree where Elena used to climb as a child, the same tree where she and Samuel had once shared picnics and stories. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew their history. David was about to signal the pastor to continue when Samuel finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he walked toward the front of the gathering. Each step seemed to carry the weight of 5 years of silence, 5 years of missed birthdays and holidays, 5 years of a grandfather who had chosen pride over presence. The crowd held its collective breath as Samuel approached the podium. He was a tall man, still imposing despite his age, but today he seemed somehow smaller, diminished by grief and regret. He placed his weathered hands on either side of the podium and looked out at the faces staring back at him. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes found David's, then moved to Marcus and Isabella, who were watching him with the curious, unguarded gaze that only children possess. They didn't understand the complexity of adult relationships, the stubborn pride that had kept their grandfather away from their lives. To them, he was simply the mysterious man their mother sometimes cried about. When Samuel finally spoke, his voice was stronger than anyone expected, carrying clearly across the cemetery despite the wind. "I am not a good man," he began, and the honesty in those 6 words immediately commanded attention. "I have made many mistakes in my life, but none greater than allowing pride to steal 5 years from me and my daughter." He paused, gathering himself, and, when he continued, his words carried the weight of accumulated regret and love that had never found proper expression. "Elena was the best of me and her mother. She had a heart bigger than this town, bigger than my stubborn old soul could understand. She saw good in everyone, believed in second chances, and loved without reservation. She got that from her mother, not from me." The crowd was beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be a typical eulogy. This was a confession, a reckoning, and, perhaps most importantly, a revelation of truth that had been buried under years of misunderstanding and hurt. Samuel's eyes filled with tears that he made no attempt to hide. "The last conversation I had with my daughter was an argument. I was angry that she chose love over security, that she chose to follow her heart instead of my plan for her life. I said things." His voice broke. "I said things that a father should never say to his daughter. Things I've regretted every single day since." The silence that followed was profound. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, as if nature itself was listening to this man's confession. David shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between his anger at Samuel and his recognition of genuine remorse. "But I want you all to know something about Elena that I was too proud to acknowledge when she was alive," Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger. "She was braver than I ever was. She chose love over money, compassion over comfort, service over selfishness. She became a nurse not because she had to, but because she wanted to heal people. She chose David not because I approved, but because he made her happy. She lived her life on her own terms, and that terrified me because it meant I couldn't control it, couldn't protect her from the pain that life inevitably brings." He turned his gaze to David and the children. "David, you gave my daughter something I never could: unconditional love and acceptance. You supported her dreams, celebrated her victories, and stood by her through challenges. You were the partner she deserved, and I was too blind and stubborn to see it." David's anger began to soften as he heard the genuine remorse in Samuel's voice. This wasn't the cold, controlling man he had come to know through Elena's stories. This was a broken father who had finally found the courage to speak his truth. "Marcus, Isabella," Samuel said, addressing his grandchildren directly for the first time. "Your mother loved you more than life itself. Every decision she made, every sacrifice she chose, was done with you in mind. She wanted you to grow up knowing that love is more important than money, that kindness is more valuable than power, that family is everything." The children looked up at their father, uncertain how to respond to this stranger who somehow seemed to know their mother so well. Samuel reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn envelope. "Elena wrote me a letter 2 years ago. I never responded to it, something I'll regret until my dying day. But she wrote about you children, about how much she wanted you to know your grandfather, about how she hoped someday we could be a family again." His hands shook as he opened the letter. "She wrote, 'Dad, I know you think I made mistakes, but my children are not among them. Marcus has your eyes and your determination. Isabella has your curiosity and your love of books. They are part of you, just as I will always be part of you, regardless of our disagreements. I hope someday you'll let them know their grandfather, because I believe they could teach you about forgiveness the way they've taught me about unconditional love." The tears were flowing freely now, not just from Samuel but from many in the crowd who were witnessing this raw display of regret and love. "I failed Elena as a father in her final years, but I swear on her grave that I will not fail her as a grandfather. I will not let pride steal any more time from this family." Samuel folded the letter carefully and looked out at the gathering one more time. "My daughter was extraordinary, and I missed 5 years of her life because I was too proud to admit I was wrong. Don't make my mistake. Don't let pride steal your moments with the people you love. Don't assume there will always be tomorrow to say the words that need saying today." He stepped back from the podium, his first words at his daughter's funeral having opened a door that had been locked for 5 years. But this was only the beginning. What Samuel didn't know was that his words had been recorded by a local journalist, and that this moment would soon ripple far beyond Millbrook Cemetery, touching lives he had never imagined and revealing secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about his daughter's final years. As the service concluded and people began to disperse, David approached Samuel for the first time since Elena's wedding. The two men stood facing each other, both changed by the words that had just been spoken, both uncertain how to bridge 5 years of hurt and misunderstanding, but both finally willing to try. 3 days after the funeral, Samuel Carter sat in his study surrounded by reminders of his life's work and his failures as a father. The walls were lined with awards, newspaper clippings documenting his business successes, and photographs from various charity events, all testaments to a public life well lived, but they couldn't mask the emptiness that had settled into his bones. The phone had been ringing constantly since his eulogy. News of his emotional speech had spread through Millbrook like wildfire, and somehow a video recorded on someone's phone had made its way to social media. Comments poured in from strangers sharing their own stories of family estrangement, of words left unsaid, of pride that had cost them precious relationships. But it wasn't the attention from strangers that consumed Samuel's thoughts. It was the knock on his door the evening before, David standing on his doorstep with Marcus and Isabella, all of them uncertain but willing to take the first steps toward becoming a family again. "Mr. Carter," David had said, his voice careful but not cold. "The kids have some questions about their mother, and I thought, maybe you'd like to help answer them." Now, as Samuel prepared for their visit this afternoon, he found himself going through boxes he hadn't opened in years. Elena's childhood belongings, photo albums from before their relationship soured, letters from her college years when she still called him daddy and signed her notes with hearts and promises to make him proud. He discovered things he had forgotten, report cards covered in gold stars, a Father's Day card she made when she was 7 declaring him the best daddy in the whole world, and pictures from family vacations where they all looked genuinely happy. There was Elena at age 5, missing her front teeth but grinning as she held up a fish she'd caught on their annual trip to Lake George. Another showed her at 16, rolling her eyes but smiling as Samuel insisted on taking a picture before her prom. When had it all gone wrong? Samuel tried to pinpoint the exact moment their relationship began to fracture, but, like most family estrangements, it hadn't been one catastrophic event but rather a series of small disappointments, misunderstandings, and stubborn positions that hardened over time into seemingly insurmountable walls. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 o'clock. David believed in punctuality, a trait Samuel respected even if he had failed to appreciate much else about his son-in-law over the years. Samuel opened the door to find the small family standing on his porch, Marcus hiding partially behind his father while Isabella stared up at Samuel with the fearless curiosity that only 6-year-olds possess. "Hello," Samuel said, suddenly, unsure of himself in a way that never happened in boardrooms or business negotiations. "Please, come in." The house felt different with children in it. Samuel realized he hadn't had young voices echoing through these halls since Elena was small. David looked around with obvious interest. This was his first time inside the Carter family home, a grand Victorian that had been in Samuel's family for 3 generations. "Mom always said this place was like a castle," Isabella announced, running her small hand along the polished banister of the main staircase. "She used to slide down these banisters when she was about your age," Samuel said, surprising himself with how easily the memory came. "Gave her mother and me heart attacks every time." Marcus perked up at this. "Mom slid down the banister?" "Oh, yes. She was quite the daredevil. Would you like to see her room? I've kept it exactly as she left it." Leading them upstairs felt like taking a journey back in time. Elena's room remained frozen in her teenage years, boy band posters on the walls, stuffed animals on the bed, and a desk still scattered with high school mementos. But it wasn't a shrine, just a room preserved by a father who had never been able to let go. Isabella immediately gravitating to the stuffed animals while Marcus studied the bookshelf filled with young adult novels and school textbooks. David stood in the doorway, taking in this glimpse of the wife he thought he knew completely. "She read all of these?" Marcus asked, clearly impressed by the number of books. "Every single one, some of them multiple times. Your mother was always reading. I used to find her with a flashlight under her covers long past bedtime, lost in some adventure story. She still did that, David said softly. Even as an adult, she'd stay up all night reading if she found a book she loved. It was the first real conversation Samuel and David had ever had, this shared recognition of Elena's quirks and habits. Samuel felt a strange warmth at learning that his daughter had carried some childhood traits into her adult life. "Mr. Carter," Marcus said, his voice tentative. "Dad says you and Mom had a fight before she died. Was it because of us?" The question hit Samuel like a physical blow. He looked at David, who nodded slightly. They had discussed this, prepared for it. "No, Marcus," Samuel said, kneeling down to the boy's eye level. "Your mother and I had a disagreement about grown-up things, but it was never, ever about you or your sister. In fact, one of the last things she said to me was how proud she was of both of you." "But why didn't you come see us?" Isabella asked with the directness that children possess. "Mommy used to cry sometimes and say she missed her daddy." Samuel felt his chest tighten. "I made a mistake, Isabella. A very big, very stupid mistake. I let my pride keep me away from the people I loved most. Sometimes adults think they're protecting their feelings, but they end up hurting everyone instead." David watched this exchange with mixed emotions. Part of him was still angry at Samuel for the years of absence, but seeing his children finally connecting with their grandfather stirred something else, hope, perhaps, or simply the recognition that they all needed healing. "Would you like to see something special?" Samuel asked the children. He led them to Elena's closet and pulled out a large, wooden chest. "Your mother made this memory box when she was about your age, Marcus. Every time something important happened, she would put a reminder in here." Opening the chest was like opening a time capsule. There were ticket stubs from movies, pressed flowers from special occasions, photographs with friends, and small treasures that had meant something to a young Elena. But, at the bottom of the box was something that made Samuel's breath catch, recent additions that Elena must have added during her adult years. Hospital bracelets from when the children were born. Report cards with Marcus's and Isabella's names. A photo from Isabella's first day of kindergarten. A drawing Marcus had made of their family, stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, Marcus, Isabella, and, in the corner, separated by what looked like a wall, another figure labeled Grandpa. "She never stopped thinking about you," David said quietly, seeing the pain on Samuel's face as he looked at the evidence of Elena's continued hope for reconciliation. "There's more," Samuel said, his voice hoarse with emotion. He pulled out a manila envelope marked "For Dad, if something ever happens to me." With shaking hands, Samuel opened the envelope. Inside was a letter dated just 6 months earlier, along with copies of photographs showing Marcus and Isabella at various ages, pictures Elena had apparently intended to share with her father if they ever reconciled. The letter began, "Dad, if you're reading this, something has happened to me and I hope you found it in your heart to forgive our stubbornness, both yours and mine. I want you to know that not a day passed that I didn't think about you, didn't hope we could find our way back to each other." Samuel's hands shook as he continued reading Elena's words aloud. "I kept all these pictures for you because I knew someday you'd want to see how Marcus and Isabella grew up. I know you think I made a mistake marrying David, but I need you to know that he's a wonderful father and husband. He makes me laugh every day, supports my dreams, and loves our children with the same fierce devotion you used to show me. The children ask about you sometimes. I tell them about the grandfather who taught me to fish, who read me stories, who made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. I want them to know that part of you, Dad. I want them to understand that people can make mistakes and still be good, that love doesn't disappear just because pride gets in the way." Samuel had to stop reading. The words were Elena's final gift to him, not condemnation for his absence, but an invitation to be part of his grandchildren's lives, a bridge built by her love even after death. Isabella had climbed into Samuel's lap while he read, and Marcus stood close by, both children instinctively offering comfort to this grandfather they were just beginning to know. "She forgave me," Samuel whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "She never blamed you," David said. "Elena always believed people deserve second chances. Third chances too, if necessary." As the afternoon continued, Samuel found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years. He showed the children photo albums, taught them the card game Elena had loved, and even convinced them to help him bake the chocolate chip cookies that had been their mother's favorite, a recipe passed down from Samuel's own mother. Watching Marcus and Isabella laugh as they tried to crack eggs and measure flour, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced in years: joy in the present moment, uncomplicated by regret or worry. For the first time since Elena's death, he could imagine a future that held something other than solitude and remorse. But, as the day wore on and the family prepared to leave, Samuel knew that rebuilding these relationships would take more than one afternoon of shared memories. Trust had to be earned back slowly, and he had 5 years of absence to atone for. "Would you like to come to Marcus's baseball game this Saturday?" David asked as they gathered their coats. Elena never missed one. She always said watching him play reminded her of something, but she never told me what. Samuel smiled through his tears. She was remembering me teaching her to catch. Every summer evening, we'd practice in the backyard until it was too dark to see the ball. She had terrible hand-eye coordination at first, but she was so determined to make me proud. "Will you come?" Marcus asked, looking up at his grandfather with hope in his eyes. "I wouldn't miss it," Samuel replied, meaning it completely. As David's car pulled away from the house, Samuel stood on his porch watching until the taillights disappeared around the corner. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't facing the evening alone with his regrets. Instead, he was planning, thinking about what stories he wanted to share at the next visit, what games he might teach the children, how he could begin to build the relationship with them that Elena had always hoped for. But Samuel didn't know that his story was far from over. Elena's letter had mentioned something that would soon change everything he thought he understood about the last 5 years of her life. Hidden among her possessions was evidence of actions she had taken, sacrifices she had made, and a truth about their estrangement that would shake the very foundation of Samuel's understanding of his daughter and himself. Samuel Carter woke before dawn on Saturday, something that hadn't happened since his early days building his business empire. But today wasn't about real estate deals or board meetings. Today was about watching his grandson play baseball and taking another step toward rebuilding the family bonds he had nearly destroyed through pride and stubbornness. He dressed carefully in casual clothes, something that felt foreign after years of formal business attire. Looking in the mirror, he saw a man transformed by grief and hope in equal measure. The sharp edges that had defined him for decades had softened, replaced by something more vulnerable but somehow stronger. The drive to Millbrook Community Park took him through neighborhoods where many of his tenants lived. Samuel owned a significant portion of the rental properties in town, something that had always been just business to him. But today, seeing children playing in yards and families preparing for weekend activities, he began to understand what Elena had meant when she criticized his landlord mentality versus his role as a community member. At the baseball field, Samuel spotted David setting up folding chairs while Marcus warmed up with his team. The other parents greeted David warmly. Clearly, the Martinez family was well liked in the community. Samuel felt a stab of regret at all the community events he had missed, all the ways he could have been part of his grandchildren's lives if pride hadn't stood in the way. "Mr. Carter." Isabella's voice rang out across the field as she spotted him walking toward the bleachers. She ran to him with the uninhibited affection that only children possess, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward where David had set up their chairs. "I told everyone you were coming," she announced proudly. "Mrs. Peterson said she remembered when you used to coach Little League a long time ago." Samuel was surprised that anyone remembered his brief stint coaching Elena's softball team when she was 12. It had been one of the few times in his adult life when business had taken a backseat to family, and the memory of those Saturday mornings teaching kids to hit and field remained one of his most treasured recollections. As the game began, Samuel found himself swept up in the simple pleasure of watching children play. Marcus was clearly talented, with natural athleticism that reminded Samuel of Elena at that age. But, more than skill, the boy displayed the kind of sportsmanship and team spirit that spoke well of his upbringing. "Elena never missed a game," David said quietly as they watched Marcus successfully steal second base. Even when she was working double shifts at the hospital, she'd arrange her schedule around his games and Isabella's dance recitals. "She was always like that," Samuel replied. "When she was little, she made me promise to attend her school plays even when I had important business meetings." I kept that promise until. He didn't finish the sentence, but David understood. Mr. Carter, came a voice from behind them. Samuel turned to see Martha Peterson, a woman he knew from various town committees but hadn't spoken to in years. I just wanted to say how sorry I was about Elena, Martha said. She was special. Did you know she organized a fund to help families pay for their children's sports fees? Several kids on this team wouldn't be playing if Elena hadn't quietly covered their expenses. Samuel felt another piece of his daughter's life clicking into place. Elena's nursing salary wasn't substantial, yet she had been using her limited resources to help other families. It was exactly the kind of generous spirit that had both amazed and frustrated him when she was younger, her inability to think of herself first. She never mentioned that, David said, clearly surprised by this information. Elena never mentioned most of what she did for people, Martha continued. She coordinated meal trains for families with sick children, she volunteered at the literacy center, and she spent her own money on supplies for Marcus's classroom when the budget was cut. That daughter of yours had a heart bigger than this whole town. As Martha walked away, Samuel felt the weight of everything he had missed, all the ways Elena had continued to make him proud while he was too stubborn to witness it. But he also felt something else, a growing understanding that his daughter had been living according to values he had instilled in her, even if he had failed to recognize it at the time. The game progressed with the easy rhythm of youth sports, parents cheering, children giving their best effort, coaches offering encouragement. Samuel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years, caught up in the simple pleasure of being part of a community event with his family. When Marcus hit what would prove to be the game-winning RBI, Samuel jumped to his feet with the other parents, cheering louder than he had for any business triumph. The joy on his grandson's face as he rounded the bases was worth more than all the real estate deals he had ever closed. After the game, as the team celebrated with juice boxes and orange slices, Marcus ran over to his grandfather with dirt on his uniform and pure happiness radiating from his smile. "Did you see my hit, Grandpa? Did you see it?" The word Grandpa hit Samuel like a lightning bolt. It was the first time either child had called him that, and the casual way Marcus said it, as if Samuel had always been part of these moments, nearly brought tears to his eyes. "I saw it, Marcus. That was a beautiful hit. Your mother would have been so proud." "She always said baseball was about more than winning," Marcus replied with the wisdom that sometimes emerges from children. "She said it was about trying your best and helping your team." As they packed up to leave, David surprised Samuel with an invitation. "We usually stop for ice cream after games. Elena started the tradition when Marcus first began playing. Would you like to join us?" The local ice cream shop was crowded with families from the game, children still in their uniforms, parents rehashing the highlights. Samuel watched Isabella carefully select her flavors, chocolate chip cookie dough with rainbow sprinkles, while Marcus opted for a simple chocolate cone. David chose vanilla, and Samuel, feeling adventurous, ordered the same combination as Isabella. "Grandpa has good taste," Isabella declared approvingly, and Samuel felt another small piece of his heart heal. As they sat outside the shop, watching other families enjoy the simple pleasure of post-game ice cream, David brought up something that had been weighing on his mind. "Mr. Carter, there's something I need to tell you. After Elena died, I found some papers in her desk. Financial records that I didn't understand at first." Samuel's attention sharpened. Elena had always been careful with money, a trait she had learned from watching him build his business empire through careful planning and strategic investments. "She had been making payments to someone for the past 3 years, David continued. Significant payments, money that should have been going toward the children's college funds or our retirement savings. When I contacted the recipient to find out what the payments were for, I learned something that I think you need to know." Samuel felt a chill despite the warm spring afternoon. "What kind of payments?" David glanced at the children, who were distracted by a dog that had wandered over seeking ice cream donations. "Elena was paying for your wife's cancer treatments. The experimental therapy that wasn't covered by insurance. She had been sending money to the medical center in Boston every month since her mother was diagnosed." The ice cream cone slipped from Samuel's hand and hit the pavement. His wife, Margaret, had died 2 years earlier after a battle with cancer. The experimental treatments had been expensive, and Samuel had liquidated several investments to cover the costs. But he had never known that Elena was contributing to those payments. "That's impossible," Samuel said weakly. "Elena didn't know about the experimental treatments. I never told her how much they cost." "She found out somehow," David said gently. "The payment records show she started contributing 3 months after her mother's diagnosis. She was sending $1,500 a month, money she borrowed against our house without telling me." Samuel's mind reeled. During the worst period of their estrangement, when they weren't speaking at all, Elena had been quietly sacrificing her family's financial security to help pay for her mother's care. She had taken on debt, risked her own family's stability, all while Samuel believed she didn't care enough to even call and check on Margaret's condition. "Why didn't she tell me?" Samuel asked, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew the answer. Pride. The same pride that had kept him from reaching out to her, that had made him assume her silence meant indifference rather than pain. "I think she knew you would refuse the help," David said. "And maybe she thought if you found out she was contributing, you'd stop the treatments rather than accept what you saw as charity from someone who had disappointed you." The truth hit Samuel like a physical blow. Elena had understood him better than he had understood himself. She had known that his pride would have prevented him from accepting her help, so she had given it secretly, sacrificing her own financial security to ensure her mother received the best possible care. "There's more," David said quietly. "I found a letter she wrote but never sent, dated just after her mother died. She wrote about how she hoped the treatments had helped, how she was grateful she could contribute something even if she couldn't be there because of your estrangement. She wrote that she hoped someday you would forgive her for not being a better daughter." Samuel buried his face in his hands. While he had been nursing his wounded pride, convinced that Elena didn't care about the family she had supposedly rejected, she had been quietly proving her love through sacrifice. She had asked for nothing, expected no recognition, sought no reconciliation in return for her generosity. "She loved you, Mr. Carter," David said. "Even when you both were too stubborn to find your way back to each other, she never stopped loving you." Marcus and Isabella returned to the table, their faces sticky with ice cream, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had just reshaped their grandfather's understanding of the past 3 years. "Can we go to the park now?" Isabella asked. "I want to show Grandpa how high I can swing." Samuel looked at his granddaughter, seeing Elena in her eager face, and made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. "Of course we can," he said, standing up and taking Isabella's small hand in his weathered one. "But first, I need to ask your father something important." He turned to David, his voice thick with emotion but steady with resolve. "I owe Elena more than I can ever repay, and I owe you an apology for the assumptions I made about your character. Would you and the children consider moving into the family house? It's too big for one person, and I think it's time it was filled with laughter again." David's eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Samuel replied. "Elena wanted her children to know their grandfather. I can't give them back their mother, but I can give them the family stability she would have wanted, and maybe, in taking care of you all, I can begin to make up for the ways I failed her." As they walked toward the playground, Isabella skipping between her father and grandfather while Marcus ran ahead to claim a swing, Samuel felt the weight of 5 years of mistakes beginning to lift from his shoulders. Elena's secret sacrifice had revealed not just her love, but the depth of his misunderstanding about the kind of person his daughter had become. But Samuel's journey of discovery was far from over. Hidden among Elena's possessions were more secrets that would soon surface, revelations that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, forgiveness, and the legacy parents leave their children. The truth about Elena's final years would prove to be more complex and beautiful than Samuel could have imagined, and it would ultimately transform not just his relationship with his grandchildren, but his understanding of what it truly means to live a life of purpose and love. 2 weeks after the baseball game, Samuel Carter stood in Elena's bedroom holding a key that would unlock the final secrets of his daughter's life. David had found the key taped under Elena's jewelry box along with a note that simply read, "For Dad, when you're ready to understand everything." The key opened a safety deposit box at Millbrook Community Bank, a box Elena had rented 3 years earlier under her maiden name. Samuel had asked David to accompany him, sensing that whatever they found would be easier to process with someone who had loved Elena as much as he did. The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, led them to the safety deposit box room with the solemn demeanor reserved for such occasions. She had known Elena from her volunteer work at the bank's financial literacy program for low-income families, yet another act of service Samuel was only now learning about. "Your daughter was remarkable," Mrs. Chen said as she inserted Elena's key alongside the bank's master key. "She helped dozens of families understand budgeting and saving. Never took a penny for it, said it was her way of giving back to the community that had given her so much." Inside the safety deposit box were documents that would reshape Samuel's understanding of everything. Bank statements, legal papers, photographs, and letters, evidence of a secret life of generosity that Elena had carefully hidden from everyone, including her husband. The first document was a trust fund Elena had established for Marcus and Isabella's education. But the source of the funding made Samuel's hands shake. Elena had been selling pieces of jewelry their family had given her over the years, including her grandmother's diamond ring and the pearl necklace Samuel had given her for her 16th birthday. "She sold Grandma Margaret's ring," David said, his voice tight with emotion. "She loved that ring. She wore it every day after her mother died." But there was more. Elena had established a scholarship fund at the local community college for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees. She had been making anonymous donations to the food bank every month. She had even been paying the rent for an elderly woman in one of Samuel's properties, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband had died, leaving her unable to afford the monthly payments. Samuel recognized the address immediately. Mrs. Rodriguez was one of his tenants, a woman he had been planning to evict for consistent late payments. He had never known that Elena was the anonymous benefactor ensuring the woman could stay in her home. How did she afford all this? Samuel asked, though he dreaded the answer. David found the explanation in Elena's meticulous financial records. She had been working extra shifts at the hospital, picking up weekend work at a clinic in the next town, and had even taken a part-time job doing medical transcription from home after Marcus and Isabella went to bed. Elena had been working nearly 60 hours a week to fund her secret charitable activities. "I thought she was just dedicated to her patients," David said, tears streaming down his face. "I never realized she was exhausting herself to help everyone else. She never complained, never said she was tired. She would come home from a double shift and still help the kids with homework, still make dinner, still listen to my problems at work." Among the papers was a letter addressed to Samuel, dated 6 months before Elena's death. Unlike the previous letters, this one had never been sealed, as if Elena had been adding to it over time, updating her thoughts and feelings as circumstances changed. Samuel read aloud, his voice breaking with each revelation. "Dad, if you're reading this, you found my secret life, as David likes to call it. I know you'll be upset that I sold Grandma's jewelry, but I hope you'll understand that I was trying to use the gifts our family gave me to give gifts to others. The ring bought textbooks for 3 nursing students who couldn't afford them. The necklace paid for groceries for families who were choosing between food and medicine. I learned about giving from you, Dad, even though you probably don't remember teaching me. When I was 8 and you bought Christmas presents for that family whose house burned down, when you quietly paid for the Johnson boys' baseball equipment after his father lost his job, when you set up that fund for playground equipment at my elementary school, I was watching, learning that people who have been blessed should bless others." Samuel's legs gave out, and he sank into the chair the bank manager had thoughtfully provided. He remembered those acts of charity from Elena's childhood, but he had thought of them as simple business decisions or tax write-offs. He had never realized that Elena had been watching, learning, internalizing lessons about generosity and community responsibility. "You taught me that wealth comes with responsibility," the letter continued. "But, somewhere along the way, you forgot that lesson yourself. You became so focused on building and protecting what you had that you stopped seeing the people around you who needed help. I was trying to remember for both of us." David found photographs tucked behind the documents, pictures of Elena at various community events, volunteering at the homeless shelter, reading to children at the library, helping elderly residents at the local nursing home. In every photo, she was smiling, engaged, clearly finding joy in service to others. She was living the life I taught her to live, Samuel said, the irony not lost on him. While I was angry that she chose service over security, she was actually following the values I had instilled in her as a child. The most devastating discovery came in a folder marked for Marcus and Isabella. Inside were letters Elena had written to her children, to be opened on their 18th birthdays. Samuel read the letter intended for Marcus. My dearest son, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you, but I hope the lessons I tried to teach through my actions will stay with you always. I want you to know that every sacrifice I made, every extra shift I worked, every dollar I gave away, was an investment in the kind of world I wanted you to grow up in. Your grandfather Samuel Carter is a good man who lost his way for a while. He taught me about generosity and community responsibility when I was small, but he forgot those lessons when life became complicated. I hope that by the time you read this, he has remembered who he used to be, because that man would be so proud of the young man you've become. The letter to Isabella was equally heartbreaking. My precious daughter, you have your grandfather's determination and your grandmother's compassionate heart. Use both of those gifts to make the world better. Don't let anyone tell you that you have to choose between success and service. You can have both if you remember that true success is measured by how many lives you touch, not how much money you accumulate. At the bottom of the safety deposit box was one final document that made Samuel gasp aloud. It was the deed to a small house on the other side of town, a house Elena had purchased and was renovating as a transitional home for women escaping domestic violence. She had been working with a local nonprofit, funding the project entirely through her secret earnings from extra work. The women's shelter, David breathed. She was always talking about the need for transitional housing, but I thought it was just conversation. She was actually doing something about it. Samuel thought about all the board meetings he had attended, all the charity galas where wealthy people wrote checks and felt good about their philanthropy. Elena had been doing real work, making real sacrifices, changing lives one person at a time while he had been content to make donations and receive public recognition for his generosity. As they gathered the documents to leave, Mrs. Chen approached them with one more revelation. I probably shouldn't tell you this, she said, but Elena came in just a week before she died. She wanted to add something to her safety deposit box. She handed Samuel a small envelope marked Final Thoughts for Dad. With trembling hands, Samuel opened what would be Elena's last communication to him. Dad, I know you think I rejected everything you taught me, but I hope someday you'll see that I was trying to live up to everything you taught me. You showed me that people who have been blessed should bless others. You taught me that wealth without purpose is meaningless. You demonstrated that true strength comes from using your advantages to help those who have fewer advantages. I love you, Dad. I always have, even when we couldn't find our way back to each other. I hope Marcus and Isabella will know their grandfather as the man who taught me about generosity, not the man who let pride steal years from our family. You have so much love to give, so much wisdom to share. Don't let our mistakes keep you from being the grandfather I know you can be. P.S. Mrs. Rodriguez in your rental property at 428 Oak Street is a good woman going through a hard time. Please be patient with her. Samuel folded the letter carefully, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. Elena had spent her final years not just living according to the values he had taught her, but actively working to protect him from the consequences of his own hardened heart. She had been paying Mrs. Rodriguez's rent to prevent Samuel from having to choose between his business interests and his compassion. As they left the bank, David and Samuel walked in silence, both processing the magnitude of what they had discovered. Elena had been living a life of extraordinary generosity while never seeking recognition or credit. She had been working herself to exhaustion to help others while maintaining a household, raising children, and dealing with the pain of estrangement from her father. I need to see Mrs. Rodriguez, Samuel said finally. And I need to understand what Elena was building at that house. David nodded. The kids and I would like to be part of continuing her work, if you're willing. Elena wouldn't want her projects to end just because she's gone. As they drove toward Oak Street, Samuel realized that his journey of understanding Elena was leading him to become the man she had always believed he could be. Her death had not just brought him face to face with his failures as a father, it had revealed a path toward redemption that would honor her memory while healing the wounds that pride and misunderstanding had created. But the most profound discovery was still to come. Elena's secret life of service was about to intersect with Samuel's business empire in ways that would force him to choose between the wealth he had spent decades accumulating and the legacy his daughter had died trying to protect. The final test of whether Samuel had truly learned from Elena's example was waiting just around the corner, and it would require him to risk everything he had built to preserve everything she had believed in. The transitional home Elena had been secretly funding was scheduled for demolition in 30 days, and Samuel Carter was the one who had ordered its destruction. The cruel irony hit him like a physical blow as he stood in front of 428 Oak Street with David, Marcus, and Isabella, reading the demolition notice posted on the door. The house was part of a city block that Samuel's company had purchased 6 months earlier for a luxury shopping development. He had never bothered to investigate what was being torn down, it was simply a business transaction, another step in expanding his real estate empire. Now, discovering that one of the obsolete properties he had condemned was actually his daughter's dream project, Samuel faced the most important decision of his life. The shopping center deal was worth millions and would cement his company's dominance in the regional retail market. But completing it would mean destroying Elena's vision of helping women rebuild their lives after escaping domestic violence. "Mom always said this neighborhood had good bones," Isabella said, running her small hand along the porch railing that Elena had been restoring. "She said old houses just needed someone to believe in them again." Marcus was studying the demolition notice with the serious expression he inherited from his grandfather. "Can't you just tell them not to tear it down, Grandpa? You're the boss, right? If only it were that simple." Samuel's business partners had invested heavily in the shopping center project based on his assurances that the land acquisition was complete. Backing out now would cost him relationships, reputation, and, quite possibly, his company. But moving forward would mean destroying the last tangible evidence of Elena's secret life of service. David unlocked the front door using keys from Elena's safety deposit box, and they stepped into a house that revealed Elena's vision more clearly than any document could have. The main floor had been converted into a welcoming common area with a kitchen designed for communal meals and living spaces arranged to provide both privacy and community. Upstairs, bedrooms had been modified to accommodate women with children, each unit equipped with small kitchenettes and study areas. "She was almost finished," David said, his voice filled with wonder and grief. "Look at the attention to every detail, she planned this so carefully." Samuel walked through rooms that Elena had painted, touched fixtures she had installed, stood in spaces she had envisioned filled with women finding their strength and independence. On the kitchen counter was a folder labeled "House Rules and Expectations" written in Elena's careful handwriting. Her guidelines were compassionate but clear: residents would contribute to household maintenance, attend educational workshops, save a portion of any income toward independent housing, and commit to supporting other residents in their journeys toward self-sufficiency. Tacked to a bulletin board were business cards from local organizations, job training programs, legal aid services, counseling centers, childcare providers. Elena had been building a comprehensive support network, creating not just housing but a pathway to genuine independence for vulnerable women. "Mom was going to call it Margaret House," Isabella announced, pointing to a small plaque Elena had made bearing her mother's name. "She said Grandma Margaret would have loved helping ladies who needed a safe place to stay." The name hit Samuel with devastating force. Elena had been planning to honor her mother's memory through service to others, creating a legacy of compassion that would bear Margaret Carter's name. It was exactly the kind of memorial Margaret would have wanted, not a marble statue or bronze plaque, but a living testament to her belief in helping others. Samuel's phone rang, interrupting his emotional survey of Elena's work. His business partner, Richard Morrison, was calling about finalizing demolition schedules. "Sam, we need to accelerate the timeline," Richard said without preamble. "The retail tenants are getting anxious about the construction schedule. Can we start demolition on Oak Street next week instead of waiting until month's end?" Samuel looked around Elena's carefully planned common room, imagining it filled with women and children rebuilding their lives. "Richard, I need to discuss something with you about the Oak Street properties." "What's to discuss?" "They're condemned buildings in a declining neighborhood. The sooner they're down, the sooner we can break ground on the shopping center. One of the buildings has historical significance. I need time to explore alternatives. Richard's laugh was dismissive. Historical significance? Sam, these are rundown houses in a low-income area. Nobody's going to care about their history when we're bringing jobs and retail opportunities to the community. After ending the call, Samuel sat on the steps of Elena's house feeling the weight of an impossible choice. He could honor his daughter's memory by preserving her project, but doing so would destroy his business reputation and, quite possibly, bankrupt his company. Or he could proceed with demolition, maintaining his financial empire while crushing Elena's dreams beneath bulldozers and progress. "What are you thinking about, Grandpa?" Marcus asked, settling beside him on the steps. "I'm thinking about choices," Samuel said. "Sometimes adults have to make very difficult decisions between things that are both important. Mom always said when she had hard choices, she asked herself what would help the most people," Isabella said, joining them on the steps. "She said money comes and goes, but helping people lasts forever." That evening, Samuel called an emergency meeting with his business partners. In the conference room where he had negotiated hundreds of deals, Samuel faced 5 men who had invested millions based on his leadership and vision. He owed them honesty about the conflict he was facing. "Gentlemen, I need to discuss a complication with the Oak Street development," he began, then proceeded to tell them about Elena's project and his moral dilemma. The reaction was predictably harsh. Richard Morrison led the charge. "Sam, I understand this is emotional for you, but we can't abandon a multi-million-dollar project because your daughter was playing house in one of the buildings. We have investors, contractors, and retail partners counting on us." Another partner, James Webb, was more diplomatic but equally firm. "What if we relocate the women's shelter project to another property? You could fund a replacement facility as a charitable donation and still proceed with our development." Samuel had considered that option, but it missed the fundamental point. Elena hadn't chosen that house randomly, she had selected it specifically because it was in a neighborhood where women transitioning from shelters could afford to live independently after completing the program. Moving to a different area would undermine the entire purpose of the project. "The location matters," Samuel explained. Elena chose that neighborhood because it's near public transportation, affordable housing, and the social services her residents would need. "It's not just about having a building, it's about creating sustainable pathways to independence." The meeting grew heated as partners threatened to dissolve the company rather than accept what they saw as an irrational business decision based on sentiment rather than sound financial planning. By the time Samuel left the office at midnight, he faced the possibility of losing both his business empire and his daughter's legacy project. Unable to sleep, Samuel found himself driving through Millbrook in the early morning hours, seeing his town through new eyes. He passed rental properties where he had raised rents without considering the human impact, saw families gathering for yard sales to make ends meet, noticed details of community life that had been invisible to him when he was focused solely on profit margins and development opportunities. At sunrise, he found himself parked outside Millbrook Community Hospital where Elena had worked. The early shift was arriving, nurses, orderlies, technicians who served the community with the same dedication Elena had shown. Many of them probably lived in neighborhoods like Oak Street, in houses that developers like Samuel considered obsolete and expendable. His phone rang. David's name appeared on the caller ID. "Mr. Carter, I hope I didn't wake you. I've been thinking about the house situation all night, and I wanted you to know that whatever you decide, the kids and I will understand. We know you have responsibilities to other people too. David, I need to ask you something. If Elena were here, what would she want me to do?" David was quiet for a long moment. "She'd want you to do what you thought was right, even if it was hard. Elena always said the measure of a person wasn't whether they made mistakes, but whether they learned from them and tried to do better." After the call, Samuel sat in his car watching the sun rise over the community where he had built his fortune. For the first time in decades, he was seeing the place not as a collection of investment opportunities but as a home where families lived, worked, and tried to build better lives for their children. The decision, when it finally came to him, felt inevitable rather than difficult. Elena had spent the last years of her life trying to show him that wealth without purpose was meaningless. She had demonstrated through her actions that true success came from using advantages to help those who had fewer advantages. Now she was offering him one final lesson from beyond the grave. Samuel drove to his office and called Richard Morrison. "Richard, I've made my decision about Oak Street. We're canceling the demolition and restructuring the shopping center project around preserving Elena's house." "Sam, you can't be serious. That will cost us millions in redesign fees alone, not to mention the reduced retail space." "I am serious. And I'm prepared to buy out any partner who can't accept this decision. Elena's house stays, and we're going to help finish what she started." The legal and financial battles that followed were brutal. Two partners chose to sell their shares back to Samuel at considerable cost to his personal wealth. The shopping center had to be completely redesigned, resulting in a smaller, more community-focused development that emphasized local businesses over national retail chains. But, as Samuel worked with Davi,